So let's talk about how I made this hyper-realistic armadillo cake, complete with disgusting leg hair. Yummy! The first thing I did was I hijacked this little fellow from my brother's art studio. Thank you, David. And I cleaned him up really well so I could use him for measurements. Don't freak out. I'm not going to rub him in the cake or anything. I just need a visual. So I'm taking my time to make measurements of his legs, of his body, the length and width, etc. If you don't have an armadillo hanging out in your house, just print out one on the computer, the size that you want, and you can figure out the structure from there. So I'm using tracing paper to mark everything out, and that's because I used two boards for this besides the baseboard. So one is wooden, and it's structurally the most sound part of this, and it's not terribly big. It's just there to support the board that's on top of it, which is the foam core. And that way, when I'm carving, if I've mismeasured something, I have a little bit of room for error. And you want to take into account the ganache and the modeling chocolate and the cake on top of it. So make that board just shy of what you think it should be. Otherwise, you might have a calorically challenged armadillo. So now I'm working on the structure. I'm putting all of the holes in the board. Don't go through the board. I'm going to glue dowels in there in a minute. So I've got all of the holes ready to go. And now I'm measuring out the legs and the height that they need to be. So what do they say? Measure 1,000,000 times, cut once. I don't know. That's not it at all. But let's highlight my problem here. The foam core should be bigger than that board right there. And I did it wrong, but ignore that. Armature wire is there for the neck and for the tail, and you can see I put aluminum foil over it. That way, everything is food safe. So now we're moving into the cake sculpting part of this, which is always so much fun and also a little bit scary. But all you're doing is stacking and layering, and then you're sculpting a very basic shape. It's kind of like a kidney bean. And then you're ganaching. I always like to use a flexible scraper just to get everything nice and tidy and make sure that it's pretty. Always work with cold cake. Always, always. It will make your life so much easier. All right, so now let's move into the goods. We're into the modeling chocolate. I always start my cakes on the underside and work my way up and like a little lip around the cake. And this is important for me because these are all attachment points and it keeps everything super sturdy and it's not going to move at all. So I'm just going to take this kind of layer by layer, adding on in bits and pieces as I go. And this is a trial and error process for me at this point. I started laying down these strips and I didn't like it. It was too perfect looking. And you'll see here in a minute where I kind of messed up. That discolored piece was my error. So now I'm trying a different method where I've used an impression mat and then I'm going back over and organically placing these little marks in it. And in a minute, I'll go back and take that other one out and make it all better. So strip by strip, little piece by little piece. And then I realized I did not like the texture on his back end. So I tried a few different things. I used a ball tool to kind of make impressions in it. And then I decided to cover it with saran wrap and press into it. And it gave it a whole different texture. I think I even used an impression mat here too. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. You just got to work with it. You got to feel it. You got to go with it. And I just repeated the same thing on his shoulders. Made sure everything was kind of cohesive and looking lovely as an armadillo can look. And then I do like a little tidy up before I get into the tail. The tail goes on the same way his little back pieces went on, one bit at a time, same method, the exact same method. So I use that mat and then I put the little impressions in there. So now we've made it to his lovely head. Now this is why I love modeling chocolate. I could create a little mound here for me to stick it on. And also the little lip that goes around the top edge of that shell like a turtle. Those little things bring everything together, and being able to blend it in, you can't do that with fondant. I mean, this is just one of those things where you need modeling chocolate. So what are we missing? We are missing a little bit of texture on the legs, and we're missing some feet, which turned out to be one of my favorite parts of this animal here. So I do one more little tidy up, and then we're going to stick on his feet, and then it's going to be time for some color. So before I accidentally became a cake artist, I was actually a painter. And I didn't want anything to do with three-dimensional art, yet here we are. So I love getting into paint. I like to use all different kinds. It's important, though, when you're working with modeling chocolate that you don't use gel. You want to use anything but gel. So like candy melt color, you're using a fat with a fat. So if you'll see here, I paint on dark and then I kind of wipe off with Everclear. I used petal dust for this, by the way, but the non-sheen. And you know what that is right there? That is corn silk that I stuck in the oven, and then I coated it with cocoa powder and stuck it on there with some edible glue. That's it. And it's amazing how that disgusting part of it brought everything to life. There's one more thing that brings this to life, though. You've got to use some sticky gel. Oh my gosh, what's it called? I can't think of it. Oh yes, I know, piping gel. And I mixed that with the coloring, and it gives it kind of like a disgusting sheen that makes him more lifelike and icky. And just those little touches like that on your cakes makes a world of difference. So I did a little bit on his back and a little bit on his feet and his snout. He just popped to life right after that. Thank you for watching. And if you want to know how to make the modeling chocolate that I use, I will link that below in the description box. Thanks!